Welcome to this symposium on a theme which I would say transcends the concerns of tourism and hospitality studies, although our focus will remain today on how the two fields converge behind the articulation of critical reflexivity in contemporary risk and emergency contexts. I wish to stress the inter and transdisciplinary value of our discussion for students, also for colleagues uh, in the Faculty of the Social Sciences at Leeds and beyond, across other disciplines in this university and other universities. Um, I would include the fields of geography, human critical geography, and also the environmental humanities. Um, so I am the director of one of the research areas in the Bauman Institute at Leeds. It is called Mobilities. And it falls on me to begin, let's say, the learning journey of the symposium. Um, I will begin with some references to epistemological repertoires that have to do with what is going on in tourism and hospitality in the age of extremes. And they are going to be hybrid. Uh, they are located across the social sciences, the humanities, and the hard sciences. Um, Before I basically hand over to today's speakers and the discussant. So, what does it mean to live in the age of extremes? And in fact, if you see one of the key sentences in the call for presentations and the invitation to keynotes is to reflect on the relevance of biopolitical approaches to hospitality and tourism in the dawn of a new and difficult century. So the age of extremes is a difficult century. Um, so the proposition is that we live in an age of extremes, a century of extreme events. And this has been approached so far in a variety of ways. I selected two, ones which are of most relevance to the mobilities theory. The first one comes, of course, from the renowned historian Eric Hobsbawm in his book The Age of Extremes, where he explores a variety of disasters that stem from state socialism, capitalism, and nationalism, amongst other things. And also, the commoditization, let's say, of public and popular cultures, he is extremely distrustful towards the role that these have to play in the production of viable futures for humanity. And he is anthropocentric, mainly. The second thesis, which is proffered by Mimi Scheller, is slightly different in mobility justice. She does condone to all the above in terms of crisis, but she stresses that these days we deal with climate catastrophes which connect to the expansion of capitalism, extreme urbanization, and which lead to multi-species extinction, but also um, we have a combination of this with new racisms, fundamentalist outlooks, sabotaging viable futures, and she says something different from what Hobsbawm, her approach to the popular and the public is slightly different. First of all, uh, especially the earlier research that she produced together with John Airy, sociologist John Airy, explored the plurality of public cultures and public spheres. And now she is also hopeful about the role that these play, especially via a combination of artistic, activist, and academic communities, the role that these play in the production of hopeful futures, not just for humanity, but also the environment and our natural home, Earth, the Earth. Okay, some keywords in today's event are those of crisis, of age, extremes, and justice. They all play a significant role in the new mobilities paradigm and beyond. Crisis is not really just about things that are happening out there. It is also about regimes of judgment and perception and the relationship between the inside, how we think about the world, and the outside, environments that are perceived as disastrous, vulnerable, etc., etc. The idea of an age, of course, shows an orientation towards temporality, whereas the extremes symbolically act as a topos. There is a spatial symbolism within the idea of the extremes. Things are taking place within a kind of, I would say, figurative domain that is very difficult. And then we have the idea of justice, which sometimes is kind of reduced to the idea of producing law on a variety of things. It can be perceived as such, as a kind of nomothetic network of rules and regulations, which are absolutely necessary sometimes so that we stabilize, let's say, what needs to be done with all the limitations this may have. But it can also be the ways particular groups govern this kind of networks, and therefore the governance of justification, the ways we justify things. And this doesn't have to deal and have to do only with legal frameworks and communities. It happens with academics as well. We have particular ways of talking about how we think about particular phenomena. So it's a set of academic truths and realities and how we test them. So what exactly is biopolitics? I'm going to say a few things about how this appears in the social sciences and beyond. Mostly in relation to critical hospitality and tourism studies. But I begin with the general, the social, and the human sciences, and I extend this to the natural sciences. So I'm talking about different biopolitical imaginaries, let's say. Let's begin with the humanist kind of traditions. And these days, we do deal also with post and anti-humanist, let's say, repertoires, which we need to explore as well. So here we are with the first complicated table here, in which I'm trying to think about the journey of biopolitics through different traditions. And I begin with the first cluster, which is the classical critical traditions of humanism, especially those associated with the work of Hannah Arendt, and thereafter Georgia Gutman and Zygmunt Bauman, which discuss the split between what we call views, which is the biographical, let's say, life of human beings, which um, enables them to be recognized by others, to acquire a form of citizenship and zoe, and the production of zoe, zoopia, which refers to bare life, life stripped of basically its rights. Um, and um, You can see that I also list the methodological kind of approaches, the disciplines of relevance, and where all speakers can be located, um, in which traditions. And I was saying the first one will definitely get a lot of the work that Claudio Minca, our discussant today, has done. And not just in tourism, but in migration. It's generally critical in human geographies. Um, and In the second one, or at least the first part of the second one, which is one of the contemporary clusters of critical traditions, uh, which approaches questions of becoming, the ontological and also the existentialist traditions that are associated with the works of Jacques Derrida, a bit Jean-Luc Nancy, Emmanuel Levinas, and a little bit of Bauman. You can, I definitely locate the work of Jenny German Maltz and her approaches to network hospitality. And I will say a bit more on this in a while. And then, of course, within these contemporary traditions, we have a split, at least from around the 1970s, between the ontologies of Derrida and the epistemologies of the likes of Michel Foucault. And in this 2.2 cluster, which is the last one in this diagram, you have the works of also Gilles Deleuze, Félix Guattari, Hart and Negri, and these basically foster the approaches we know as, you know, the couple between power and knowledge, the approaches to discipline and control, and how this can be juxtaposed basically to the emergence of revolutions, of new nomadisms and post-identities within networks, let's say, or reactive networks. And this is where I would position actually Dominic Lapont's work and his presentation today. Okay, the third cluster is based on a hybridization between scientific and humanist approaches to what we call post-humanism. This new post-humanist theory kind of discards ideas of conflict and control. Post-humanists, especially of the feminist kind of trend, such as Sanat Singh or Rosie Braidotti or Karen Barrett, they come from different walks of social or science or humanities or even the hard sciences. But they are more interested in how we can transform contexts of survival into environments of flourishing. They do not like adversarial, let's say, biopolitics. They prefer to speak about symbiotics, the hope and possibility of not just survival, but also coexistence in the hostile environments of the Anthropocene. Of course, there is another trend within posthumanism that comes from science and technology studies and the Deleuzians, and they are the ones who are more interested basically in the relationship between human and technology. Donna Haraway could be classified as such, but she's mostly these days part of the new, let's say, realists of the feminist realists, we talk about basically the possibility of interaction, which is basically the development, the production of reality through entanglements and encounters between inanimate matter and humans, but also the environment. And this is something ad hoc happening. Um, there is some space here for different genres, design genres for the future, including science fiction and speculative futurism. And it's for this reason only, it is a trend that is quite popular across the humanities as well, and the environmental humanities and beyond. Actually, you can find it in arts and performance studies. I would place actually the presentation that you will get today after me by Noel Salazar within this cluster. With a word of caution, of course, he doesn't do everything, but he emphasizes in his presentation planetary interconnectedness, or the possibility of planetary interconnectedness that can forge new cultures of care, not just for humans, but also for the environment. The fourth cluster, interestingly, is again, it is blending scientific, social scientific, and repertoires. It is the domain of meta theory, speculating on all the rest and trying to understand what is going on in these debates, across these debates. Some of its proponents, but not all of them, they're not uniform what they have to say, in the sense of that some of them are still within humanist traditions, some are post-humanist, some are anti-humanist, so it depends. And of course there is a lot of decolonial studies scholars, for example, within these debates. But what persists in this kind of cluster is discarding the idea of the globe for understandings of the world as a sphere, and the discarding of globalization jargon in favor of planetarianism and planetary thought. Therefore, conceptions of biopolitics within this cluster have to do with more than human interests. I mean, some of the scholars focus specifically on them, but most of them are more interested in reconfigurations of views as planetary life beyond what it means to be human. So we have a new rights agenda, let's say, within this cluster. This is where I'm working currently on utopian possibilities for the future. I'll try to categorize specifically critical tourism and hospitality study scholars and this expansive schema of traditions. And it's quite difficult, and one of the reasons why this happens is that, especially if we follow Weaver's kind of observations, is that it's not just that these two fields are transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, they're also transdisciplinary, and therefore scholars kind of jump from one school to the next, and depending on the context in which they work. And of course, both fields develop so rapidly that we have to catch up with new developments. And quite often this necessitates new analytical, conceptual and methodological tools. At some point, I stopped categorizing. It's impossible. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that we do deal with an ever-expansive imaginary field, hosting different perspectives on planetary issues, with different academic and lay communities of practice, kind of craft and recraft all the time. Um, and we can't really dwell on all these perspectives in any detail here, but today we can have a glimpse into at least four of them on the futures of tourism and hospitality. The first one will adopt a grand kind of post-humanist approach to biopolitics as a potentially symbiotic project that can forge multi-species futures of care. The second draws attention to the biopoliticization of pleasure peripheries, in which entanglements of human, social, and natural rhythms are disrupted sometimes by uneven development. The third tells us a story about the uncertain futures of hosting tourism, when the host is reduced basically to a ghost, a virtual digital ghost, and practically becomes an absent dweller of the rented home. And our discussant, who is one of the prominent biopolitics in tourism scholars, will provide some general reflections on all three presentations, and then also open the floor to general questions.